stayed in Germany for 5 years. When my brothers finally got old enough to take care of themselves, I left and I never returned. I came back to Vienna. Finally, I was going to study with Mozart. I got back to Vienna in early 1792, and when I returned, I received more bad news. They told me that Mozart had died. I know everyone dies, but it wasn't fair. When Mozart died on December 5th, 1791, he wasn't 85 years old, 65, 45. He was only 35 years old. When Mozart died, there was only one other great musician left in Vienna that I wanted to study with. His name was Joseph Haydn. In many ways, he was the equal of Mozart as a composer. He wrote 104 symphonies for the orchestra. And this is the last part of his last symphony that he called the London Symphony. I studied with Haydn for about a year. And then he had the chance to go to London, England, to give concerts, to make a lot of money, and he certainly deserved that opportunity. So he left, and I couldn't study with anyone else because there was no one left in Vienna that I admired enough as a musician. All the other musicians at that time were very old-fashioned. They couldn't understand that the world was changing back then in Europe in the 1790s, especially through music. From around 1770 to 1800 in Europe, there was a certain style of music that was very popular. It was called the classical style. It was music of elegance and refinement and beautiful sounds. And the two stars of the classical age were Mozart and Haydn. This is an example of the classical style of music, a piece by Mozart. If you asked me, what do I picture in my head when I listen to this music? I wouldn't picture anything. I would just hear beautiful sounds that work perfectly together. That's what the aristocracy wanted to hear. But I wanted to play different kind of music. I had different ideas. I didn't want to write music that was elegant and refined. I wanted to write music with pain and anguish, misery, suffering, heroic struggle and victory. I wanted to write music of my life and what I had been through. The old-fashioned musicians couldn't understand those ideas. The people who lived in the palaces, the kings, the queens, the princes, and the dukes had servants to cook, servants to clean, and servants to write and perform music for them. And I was expected to be a servant, but I refused. My world was changing. When I was growing up as a boy, I remember reading about the American Revolution in 1776 for freedom. As a teenager in 1789, I remember how the French Revolution shook Europe to its foundations with its cries for freedom and liberty. And I wanted freedom to express myself as a musician and not to have to take orders. Who were these aristocrats to give me orders? How you told my friends, how do you get to be a king or a queen? You get born into the right family and you grow up to be a king or a queen. It's all luck. I'm who I am because of hard work and talent. There have been thousands of kings and queens in history, I told people, but there's only one Beethoven. I wanted to take the pain, the anger, and the suffering that was in my heart and put it into my music. So I did that in order to express myself. I told you I ended the classical age. I ended the day when a musician was nothing but a servant writing pleasant, elegant music for the aristocrats. And I started a new day, a day when musicians could be free. Whenever the rules of the classical styles were in my way, I broke the rules. I wrote new kind of music that people never heard before, music of freedom, music that allowed me to express what was inside me as a person. In 1796, I wrote a new kind of piano sonata. I called it the pathétique. I got that word from the Greek language, pathos, a word that means terrible suffering. Now that you know something about me, what I've been through in my life, you'll understand why my music has to sound this way. They hated that. The old-fashioned musicians hated that music. They said it wasn't even music. It was just loud noise. They said, Beethoven, you're not playing the piano like a gentleman. You're supposed to play just with the fingers and the wrists, not bang on it with your arms and shoulders. I wanted to play the piano like that because I wanted to get new sounds that no one had ever heard. And to get those new sounds, I had to play it in a new way. Up until the early 1700s in Europe, the harpsichord was the most popular keyboard instrument. The harpsichord was a very delicate instrument. It couldn't play very loudly or very softly. In the early 1700s, in Italy, a new keyboard instrument was invented, the fortepiano. That means the loud, soft, because the new instrument, which came to be called the piano, could play loudly and softly. It could create sounds that the harpsichord couldn't. And I had to play the piano in a new way in order to get those sounds out. I had to play with my arms and my shoulders as well as my fingers and my wrists. Mozart wrote a lot of music for the piano, but he and his generation were raised playing the harpsichord. And they played the piano the same way that you play a harpsichord, with the fingers and the wrists. By the time the piano became very popular in the 1770s, my generation had entered the scene. We had not been raised on the harpsichord. We were playing the piano. And we had to play the piano in a different way to get those new, different sounds out. So those are the kind of sounds that I wanted. I wanted my music to shout with pain and anger and suffering. So I had to play it in a new way. People didn't understand my music at first. The people in the palaces, the aristocracy, were afraid to invite me to their palaces to play their pianos. They were afraid that I would break their pianos. And I did. I broke so many pianos in Vienna that they had a nickname for me. They called me the String Buster. Back in the 1770s, 1780s, the piano was still a very fragile, weak, delicate instrument. That's why people were still playing it kind of like the harpsichord, fingers and wrists. And when you play them that way, it sounded like a music box. I wanted my music to sound like a lion. I wanted my music to roar. In order to get those sounds out, I had to play with everything I had. And when I played the piano like that, the strings would pop up and fly out in all different directions. Young people would watch me play and they'd rush home to play the piano like Beethoven. And they broke pianos like Beethoven. And soon there were so many broken pianos throughout Vienna that the piano companies had to come up with a new way to make the piano stronger and sturdier before this crazy man broke all the pianos that were left. So I take a lot of credit for changing the way pianos nowadays are made and the way they're still played. The old-fashioned musicians could never get used to my new music, but I didn't care. The young people were on my side. They wanted to hear more. In my day, we didn't have TV and video and radio. If people wanted to hear my new music, I had to go to their towns and their cities to perform. So that's what I did. When I was 26 years old, I traveled around and I gave concerts of this new kind of music. And the young people, my generation, loved it. And soon they said I was the greatest musician of my time. So there I was. I was 26 years old. And the dream that I had when I was a child was coming true. The world was loving my music. I was the happiest person on earth.